Have you ever imagined dying and receiving from Jesus the revelation of the true plan behind Donald Trump and the spiritual destiny of America? In today's video, hear the impressive story of Ryan McAllister, a former Pentagon agent who returned from the dead with an urgent message for us all. If this resonates with you, like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, and comment below which city you're watching from. Let's spread this message together. My name is Ryan McAllister. I'm 44 years old, born in Indiana, and a former intelligence analyst for the Department of Defense. I've always been a man of logic, of data, of real threats. The spiritual world was to me merely an abstraction, something for the weak or the desperate, until the day my heart simply stopped. Inside the Pentagon itself, it was March 3rd, 2025. We were in a classified national security meeting. I had slept little. I was stressed. My vision was blurry. I remembered the sound of a pen hitting the floor and then nothing. The void. The end. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because when my eyes closed here, something inside me opened up somewhere else. I found myself outside my body, floating above the conference table. I saw my body being shaken by colleagues. I saw the confusion, screaming, running, but I was calm, fully conscious, at peace, as if I were being called away from it all. It was then that the light appeared. It was no ordinary light. It was like living tissue, pulsing with love, and from it, a figure emerged. Someone I never dared imagine I would encounter like this. Jesus Christ. He looked at me, but it wasn't a human look. It was as if the entire universe crossed me at that moment, and without words, I knew he was going to show me something I would never forget. Ryan, he said, soundlessly, but straight to my soul. The truth is far beyond the reports you've read, and that's when the revelation began. I was transported. It was as if my soul had been sucked into an invisible whirlpool. When my feet touched the ground again, I realized I wasn't anywhere on Earth as we know it. It was like seeing the United States from above, but in a completely different way. What I saw wasn't geography. It was spirituality in its purest form, a map of the nation's soul. And what I saw chilled my spirit, had black roots emerging from large urban centers, extending into the interior of the country like tentacles. These roots vibrated with words I could read even without them being written. Division, power for power's sake, pride, religion without love, manipulation. Each of these spiritual roots involved millions of people, as if sucking energy from them without their realizing it. Jesus was by my side. He didn't explain it to me with words, but with visions that went straight to my understanding. I saw families being torn apart by political opinions, churches being divided, children growing up aimlessly. I saw a darkness that did not come from politics, but was fueled by it. This is the real war, he said, his voice audible now, steady as thunder. A war few see. And when he said this, a spiritual heaven opened up about America. And there, I saw behind the scenes of what really happens. I saw hidden spiritual figures, hooded beings, walking the gilded corridors of Washington, Wall Street, Silicon Valley. They communicated with leaders, influenced legislation, and spread narratives. These beings, they were not afraid of weapons or votes. They feared only the truth. They feed chaos, for in chaos they reign. I was horrified. I thought, there's no hope. But Jesus looked at me and said, there is hope, but it will come in a way you don't expect. And it was then that he showed me who would be used to break this cycle. Do you want me to continue with the topic 3? The hurricane at the eye of the storm. My vision shifted. As if cut sharply, I was thrown into the center of a spiritual whirlwind. A colossal hurricane raged over the United States, its dark clouds made of screams, insults, distorted news, and hatred. It was as if chaos itself had become a living creature. In the eye of the storm, Donald Trump. I froze. He wasn't on a platform. He wasn't giving a speech. He was just being, in his provocative, unpredictable, loud way. But around him there was something strange. Two forces in constant collision. On one side, chaos, spiritual demons, shadowy figures screaming with hatred, trying to surround him, to bring him down. On the other, thousands of tiny points of light like prayers in the form of arrows, rising from houses, churches, people kneeling in silence. These lights beat around him like invisible shields. Confused, I looked at Jesus. Him? Why him? Jesus answered me with a look that swept my entire spirit. You were trained to see the man. I use you as a tool. At that moment, I saw Trump as a spiritual sledgehammer, not for sanctity, but for function. He entered ancient halls, rooms covered in grotesque webs of corruption, hidden agreements, and unspeakable pacts between politicians, religions, and elites. Every step he took was a lie crumbling, but he did not do this with spiritual intention. He did it because that's who he is, impulsive, indomitable, and because of that, perfect for the chaos that needed to be exposed. The creatures of darkness didn't hate him for his flaws. They hated him because he brought light where there should never be light, because he disrupted centuries of silent control. I did not send him as an example of righteousness, said Jesus. I sent it as an alarm. It was as if God had chosen the most unlikely to expose the deepest, not because he deserved it, but because no other would have the courage or recklessness to break through the hidden walls of the system. Then the phrase Jesus said echoed within me like thunder. The hatred that surrounds him is not against him. It is against the crack he opened. And it was there, in that hurricane, that I realized it wasn't about politics. It was about spiritual warfare. Trump was just a sign that the darkness was being forced out of its hiding place. I was sucked downward, as if passing through invisible layers of the earth. When I stopped, I was standing before a colossal structure, an underground cathedral. But it wasn't sacred. It was dark, oppressive, ancient. The air there was thick. The walls, made of dark stone, pulsed with a heavy, suffocating energy. Covered by dark webs, thick as ropes, formed distorted patterns, almost like secret symbols. Each web seemed alive, made of lies, state secrets, ancient pacts, and corruption ingrained in the roots of history. Inside, humanoid shadows moved slowly. They wore robes and masks of ancient gold, but their eyes glowed red, like embers. They weren't human. They were spirits, guardians of lies. Each of them was in charge of a different part of the cathedral, a room marked justice, education, media, religion, science. But everything was there, contaminated, poisoned. And then, the door exploded. Donald Trump entered, not with reverence, not with understanding, but as a hurricane in the shape of a man, shouting, knocking over spiritual furniture, bumping into sacred things not out of malice but by his very nature. And wherever he went, the webs were torn. The beings screamed. It wasn't hate. It was dread. They spent centuries weaving these structures, Jesus said beside me. And now, in just a few years, he is tearing them apart. I saw Trump with a club in his hands, not literally, but spiritually. And with it, he was banging pillars, toppling fake gold statues, shaking foundations. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't organized, but it was effective. Each impact caused cracks in the cathedral's ceiling, and through these cracks, light began to enter. Those who asked me for an awakening did not know that I would bring it like this, Jesus said. They expected a gentle rain. I sent an earthquake. Then I understood. The Christians themselves were confused, rejecting the tool because it was too crude. But there, before my eyes, the cathedral of darkness trembled, not by a sermon, not by diplomacy, but by an imperfect soul being used as a catalyst. He doesn't know everything he's doing, but I do, said the Lord, and that is why he was chosen. The guardians' masks began to fall, the webs burned, the bases trembled, and I understood. The exhibition was just beginning, and the world still had no idea what was about to happen. The underground cathedral crumbled around me like wind-blown sand, and in the blink of an eye, I found myself in a vast, completely white hall. But it wasn't empty. In the center of it, on a pedestal of living light, rested a colossal book. It was made of something that looked like paper but shone like liquid gold. It was alive. It breathed. Each page carried words that were not written, were decreed. And on the cover, 3 letters in pure fire, United States. Jesus walked over to the book and opened it. The pages turned by themselves, as if time were blowing them. What I saw in them were not stories from the past. They were spiritual records, the true intentions behind laws, presidential decisions, wars, and elections. And then, I saw the future. At the end of the book, there was a blank section, but above it, an inscription clear as lightning. Time left, 6 years. I was in shock. 6 years? Until what? I asked. Jesus looked at me deeply. To the final crossroads, the line where America will decide between light and darkness. My knees buckled. I felt the weight of that information on my spirit. You have been praying for revival, but you don't know what it requires. It requires a breakthrough. It requires truth, and it requires time. And time is running out. Then he showed what was to come. If prayers ceased and people returned to trusting only in men, in the media, in political parties, we a spiritual civil war, a country divided not into states, but into souls. I saw churches rising up against churches. I saw the media spewing venom. I saw children rejecting their parents over political disagreements. An internal collapse that began with words but ended in blood. But then, I saw another scenario. If people would pray, if they would unite not by politics more but by the Spirit. I saw multitudes gathered, holding hands. I saw lights rising like beams of energy from the ground to the sky. I saw the book being rewritten with lines of hope. The future is still open, but not for long, said Jesus. Then, with a gesture, he turned a final page, and there, written with heavenly fire, a sentence cut through my understanding like a sword. I didn't send Trump to save a nation. I sent him to expose what needs saving. And in that moment, I understood. Trump's role was just the trigger. What mattered was the people's reaction. What would we do with the crack he had created? The crack in the lie, the crack in the facade religion, the crack in the rotten system. The countdown had begun, and the celestial clock, don't delay. After I saw the book and the countdown, I was taken to a dark field like a silent plane. But soon I realized this was not a physical place. It was America's battlefield. The real, the invisible. Overhead, the same dark clouds I'd seen before swirled with anger, fueled by shouting, gossip, manipulated headlines, online sarcasm, and distorted prayers. Yes, even prayers became dangerous weapons when offered with hate. Jesus extended his arm and pointed to the ground. Down below, in small spots scattered across the land, I saw scenes that tore at my core. A woman in Ohio praying alone in her kitchen, tears wetting her open Bible. A group of truckers in Montana kneel around a radio, calling out to their nation. Children in a border shelter praying for their parents. A simple pastor and from a small church, praying with trembling hands, not knowing that his intercession broke chains in the spiritual world. Every sincere prayer fired thin rays of light, small but powerful. They rose like arrows, piercing the dense clouds, opening cracks of light. Through each gap, the glory of God began to flow over the people, waking sleeping hearts, dissipating lies like vapor. But on the other hand, I also saw distorted prayers, people praying against their brothers, cursing political leaders, asking for justice with a spirit of vengeance. These prayers did not go up. They swirled around people, creating shackles of pride like spiritual handcuffs. Their power is in their purity, not in their fury, said Jesus. When they pray with love, they free me to act, but when they pray with hate, they only strengthen the enemy. And then he showed me something that left a deep impression on me. In Florida, a teenager with headphones was listening to Christian music and, alone, whispered, "God, change my country." That whisper, almost imperceptible, it was like an explosion in the spiritual sky. The clouds above him parted violently, and an angel came down armed with light, clearing a huge area of darkness. Jesus smiled. They think they are weak, but prayer in secret is the most powerful attack there is. It was there that I understood. America's real battle isn't at the ballot box. It's in living rooms, in bedrooms, in kitchens, in silence. And the most ignored weapon of the century was prayer with a pure heart. Suddenly, I was pulled into a new environment. It felt like a courtroom, but not like the ones we see on earth. This one was spiritual, eternal tribunal, with columns that glowed like fire and living walls that pulsed with justice. In the center, there was a thick, black curtain, trembling as if hiding something monstrous behind it. Jesus stood beside me, and with a subtle gesture, the curtain opened. Behind her, I saw faces, familiar faces from the media, government leaders, executives from companies that dominate the digital world. religious figures with millions of followers. They were gathered as if in a secret meeting, but they didn't realize they were being watched. Each of them had spiritual threads attached to the fingers, manipulating events, scandals, policies, narratives. But the threads weren't coming from his hands. They were coming from his back. Behind each one, there was dark creatures, ancient entities, with distorted forms, whispering in the ears of the powerful, promise what you cannot deliver, divide, label, confuse, offer freedom, but enslave with fear. Jesus said to me in a firm voice, "This is behind the scenes. Here is the true government of darkness. They hide under the guise of progress, freedom, and inclusion, but behind the scenes, they fuel chaos." I saw it as normal decisions in Washington or in the chambers of Congress originated in these hidden spiritual encounters. I saw how scandals were manufactured, how characters were canceled or promoted according to plan. Nothing was by chance. But then something happened. The courtroom shook, the columns vibrated, and a voice, different from Jesus, echoed through the heavens. "It's time for the exhibition." The masks began to fall. I saw a famous pastor with a completely different face behind his back. I saw a journalist who spoke of justice but was sold out to hidden interests. I saw a judge who feigned impartiality but had spiritual pacts with entities. And in the center, I saw a seal being broken. It was as if the sky was saying, "Enough." A wave of light came out of the altar and flooded the court, revealing things that had been hidden for centuries. And Jesus said, "It is happening now. Little by little, one by one, I will bring them into the light. But make no mistake, judgment begins in my house." I was silent. This was deeper than I could comprehend. The exposure isn't meant to punish. It's meant to give people a chance to repent. But many won't accept it. They'll resist until the end. And then Jesus looked at me with eyes of fire. "You need to tell this. People think chaos is accidental, but it was planned. And now, I'm being confronted." The scene changed once more. I was led into a narrow, ancient corridor made of living stone. At the end of this corridor was a huge door, majestic in appearance, but sealed on the inside. It was like an entrance to a spiritual vault, locked for generations. Jesus looked at me and said, "This door represents the hidden heart of America, a place few dare touch, the deepest point of alliances made in secret." In front of that door, many had already tried to enter. I saw figures from past and present, presidents, pastors, activists, religious leaders, all trying to open it with speeches, with good intentions, with intelligence, but none succeeded. Then I saw a scene that shocked me. Trump emerged, but he didn't come with a key, nor with reverence. He came with a kick, literally. He kicked the door, screaming, angry, without protocol, and, to my surprise, the lock gave way. Not because he knew what he was doing, but because God had chosen someone rough enough not to be intimidated. And when the door opened, thick black smoke poured out of it, as if the whole of hell had been exposed to light for the first time. Inside, I saw spiritually burned documents, buried pacts, hidden agreements between religious leaders and global elites, all done in the name of God, but driven by vanity and hunger for power. They were expecting a shepherd. "I sent a man who dismantled the sheep," Jesus said. "I saw that most people I wasn't prepared to deal with the contents of that room. It was too dirty, too rotten. The institutions America trusted most were there, and they had been corrupted from the start. And that is why the reaction against him is so furious," Jesus explained, "because he opened the room that no one wanted to be opened." And then something profound was said, something that still resonates with me today. The role of the imperfect is not to point the way. It is to blow up the gate that blocked the road. And so, I understood. It wasn't about following Trump. It was about recognizing what God was revealing through him, the content behind the door, the hidden truth. "Now that the door is open," Jesus said, "my people must decide. Will they enter with courage, or will they close it again out of fear?" The time for neutrality was over. What had been exposed could no longer be ignored, and that imperfect man, with all his flaws, had completed the first part of the mission, breaking down the door that everyone pretended didn't exist. Beyond the broken door, I was led into a vast field, as if the entire United States lay before me, but now with the spiritual heart of the nation exposed. And Jesus said to me, "Now the people have a choice, and there will be no third way." In front of me, I saw two paths opening before America. One led to increasing light, revival, reconciliation, and restoration. The other led to deep darkness, violence, internal division, and spiritual collapse. The most shocking detail: the two paths were intertwined for a time. From a distance, they looked the same, and it was almost impossible to tell which was which, until one was chosen. I saw crowds running in a hurry, shouting freedom, rights, justice, but without direction. Some sought it in political parties, others in revolutions, many in famous pastors, but few, very few, were on their knees. Jesus showed me that the awakening would not come from the majority, but from the bended knees of the faithful minority. I saw ordinary homes, neighborhood churches, schools with broken teachers. Every person who chose sincere prayer opened cracks of light in the structures of darkness. But I also saw the danger. Those who resisted exposure, vain religious figures, corrupt politicians, influential leaders who would lose their reputations if the truth came out, they began to build a new veil, a false spiritual narrative, a pseudo-revival full of noise but without repentance. Jesus said sadly, "They want the blessing without the exposure. But there is no healing where there is no truth." I saw that this false awakening attracted crowds, but it left hearts empty. It was a performance. And then I heard the sound of trumpets, but not a party. They were a warning. Time is running out. There is a crack, and either the light breaks through now, or the enemy will seal it again with 7 layers of deception. Jesus showed me 2 maps, one with lights growing, expanding, reaching every state, the other with cracks, entire states in spiritual turmoil, brothers against brothers, churches attacking each other, governments losing control. The Great Awakening or the total fall. You still have the choice. And it was then that I understood the final sentence of that moment. America is on the verge of birth, but every nation about to be born screams before life. There is no more time for lukewarmness. There is no more room for neutrality. God is tearing the veils. It is up to the people to decide whether they will wake up or be swallowed by darkness. The vision began to fade, but before it all disappeared, Jesus led me to one last place. It was simple, a silent hill, from where the entire nation could be seen, not with the eyes, but with the Spirit. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't soft now. It was like a thunder wrapped in tenderness. Every word seemed to resonate in the foundations of the earth. "Ryan, you saw what many deny. They heard my warnings, but they called them theories. They rejected my messages because they didn't come from the pulpits they approve of. But I choose whoever I want, and I use whoever listens to me. And now, it's time to tell the world." He pointed down, at me. "You thought your life was all about security, analysis, and control. But your true mission begins now, not to save a country with guns, but to awaken hearts with the truth." At that moment, thousands of voices echoed in the sky. They were not angels. They were people of earth, people praying, crying out, some in tears, others in despair. Every sincere voice opened portals of light over cities, neighborhoods, schools, even prisons. Jesus opened his arms, and the light that came from him enveloped the entire scene. The pain, the confusion, the anger, everything dissolved wherever that light touched. And he declared, "This is the time of outcry. This is the time of exposure. This is the time of confrontation between truth and deception. Tell them to stop waiting for a perfect leader. There is no man who can save a nation, but there is a God who saves those who humble themselves." Say Trump was just the trumpet, the sound, the knock that wakes the sleepers. But what they do with that awakening will define everything. And then Jesus touched my chest. It was as if my entire spirit was sealed with a divine commission. "Come back, Ryan. Speak, shout, write, record, show. It doesn't matter if they believe it. What matters is that you speak." The light around me began to fade. My heart, once dead, began to beat. An intense pain shot through my chest. I felt cold, felt the weight of gravity. I was coming back. The last thing I heard was the voice of Jesus echoing in my soul. America still has a chance, but it depends on who hears my voice and chooses to obey. I woke up to screams, lights, sirens, a doctor yelling, "We have a pulse," and tears in the eyes of someone holding my hand. But nothing was the same anymore. I was no longer the same. And now, I'm here, not to convince you, but to warn you. He's exposing everything, and time is running out. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, please leave a like, comment, share your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.